right. Can somebody roll the lights for me, please? Just turn the knob, please. That'd be great. Thank you. All right. So we are wrapping up our Dominoes series. Does that make you guys sad? Yes. We're wrapping up our Dominoes series. Does that make you guys sad? It's the last one. Like the last Dominoes. Next Sunday and the following Sunday, we're going to do some other stuff, a little bit more topical stuff.
I thought you said that you're going to have the DCC.
They were here this morning. No. They were here this morning. Oh, no, I lost my place. That's okay. It opened right to it. Because I've been here quite a bit lately. All right, so we have been in the book of John. Correct, good. Been in the book of John. Talking about these different guys following Jesus, starting with, Andrew and Philip, and we looked at Peter and Nathaniel. Last week we looked at Nicodemus. He was a little bit different. Today we're going to be very different at the disciple we're looking at. We're in John chapter 4, if you want to be there. I'll refer back. I'll read a little bit. I'm not going to read the whole passage because it's kind of long. But I'll refer back to it. I'll read a few verses. But here in John chapter 4, in case you didn't know, the four Gospels were all written a little different. If you've read through them, you probably knew that. The first three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are called the Synoptic Gospels. They kind of follow a similar pattern. Pattern of 1 year of ministry for Jesus leading up to Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, that's where he died on the cross. John takes a little bit different approach. His is the 3-year spectrum, and that's why most people think that Jesus' ministry lasted 3 years. But he goes to and from Jerusalem 3 times, which marks 3 trips of Passover, so 3 years total. And so here in John chapter 4, Jesus is leaving Jerusalem for the first time. He's going back home. He's on his way back home to Nazareth, to Galilee, where he's from. And he's got himself a good little reputation in his first year of ministry. People know who he is. This is John chapter 4, verse 1. They're making a lot of noise about him, and he's kind of got this reputation. He's like, I don't want any of that nonsense. So he starts heading home. And in between Jerusalem, the region of where Jerusalem is, and Galilee, the region where he's from, there's this little place called Samaria. Now, Samaria is a town as well as a region full of returned exiles from when the foreign leaders went and took off Israel into exile. Some of them went back, but they had intermarried with the other cultures, and when they came back, they were not completely Jewish, is the idea. And then when in the second wave of people returning from exile, they had remained pure to their Jewish faith. They had stayed. They didn't intermarry with other religions or anything, other cultures. And so there was this animosity. I've talked about this before. There was this animosity between Jews, pure Jews in their minds, and these Samaritans. They were half-breeds. They had married with other cultures, with other countries, and they were tainted, is the idea. They were dirty. And so there was this deep-seated racism between the Samaritans and the Jews. And in Samaria, we talked about this a little bit when we talked about Nehemiah. In Samaria is where they built the second temple where they would worship, and that's the idea. And so there was this kind of dispute, and we'll get into that. But here at the beginning of John chapter 4, Jesus got his reputation. He's on his way home, and sometimes what people would do is if they had the time, they would completely go around Samaria. Even though it's like right in the middle of the pathway, they would just be like, no, I'm good. And they would exit stage right and go around the Jordan River and come back in to Galilee. That was kind of their thing. And Jesus is like, nope, we're going through Samaria. I don't care. We're going. He had intent while he was passing through. I like in the King James, it says he must needs go through Samaria. That's what it says in the King James. I like that, but I also like what the CSB says. It says, he left Judea and went again to Galilee, this verse 4. He had to travel through Samaria, verse 5. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar. It's like he had to go through there, and because he had to go through there, he went to this town where Jacob's well was. And he said, you know what? I'm going to go this way, and there's this town, and I'm going to go there because there's something big going to happen there. And I kind of wanted to take a note there and say that while we're passing through our life, if we have that kind of intent, we can make these kinds of big differences. But we have to be observant, and we have to have intent along the way. That's what the Great Commission is. It says, as you are going, make disciples. That word go, therefore, make disciples is actually, it's called a present participle. So going, make disciples. Like as you go, on your way, make disciples. But that's not something that's done on accident. And Jesus didn't accidentally pass through Samaria. He didn't accidentally go to Sychar and accidentally sit down at this well. Jesus had intention, and we need to have the same kind of intention in our everyday walk. But he goes on, verses 6 through 8, and it says that it was the heat of the day. And so he was like, it's hot. I'm going to get me some water. The heat of the day is like midday, right? Late midday. We know like 1:30, 3 o'clock. It's hot, right? We know what that's like during 2 days. It's hot, okay? Excuse me. And so it's hot. And he's like, I'm going to get some water. And he sent his guys, his boys, his entourage, the disciples, into Jerusalem to get some food because they were hungry. They had been walking a lot. And so he sits down and he sees this woman here, and he asks her for water. He says, hey, can you draw me up some water? And now this woman, now marked as the Samaritan woman or the woman at the well, as we know in Christian circles, is kind of how we name her. She's like, whoa, wait a minute. You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan, and you're a man and I'm a woman. Why are you even talking to me? Because in this culture, women were considered second-class citizens, first of all. And second, remember, Jews hated Samaritans. There was this racial divide. So in today's culture, we would say that she checked all the intersectional boxes. She was there's no reason for a Jewish man or that much a rabbi to be speaking to this woman, and yet here he is. He says, "Can you draw me up some water?" And one of the reasons this is such a big deal, you have to think about, if you think back to before the civil rights movement, back when they had the Jim Crow laws and the separation, there was a reason that the black folk had their own water fountain and the white folk had theirs. The idea was, those dirty black folk ain't touching my water. And there was the same idea here in Samaria, because the Jews would treat Samaritans that way. Just like back in the Jim Crow days. It was this, you're less, so don't touch anything I'm going to come in contact with. So Jesus is breaking all the rules. I like Jesus. He's a rebel. And so she's like, but what about? And Jesus is like, dude, if you only knew who was talking to you. Verse 10, it says that Jesus answered, if you knew the gift of God and who is saying to you, give me a drink, you would ask him and he would give you living water. Jesus is like, you have no idea what's going on here. You're worried about this racial tension, and you have nothing, no clue, no concept. And he offers her this living water. He says, you'll have this own well that you can drink from. You don't have to come here. It says, everyone who drinks this water, the water from the well there, Jacob's well in Sychar, will get thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I will give will never get thirsty again. In fact, I will give him the water I will give him will become a well of water springing up within him. It's like, you don't need to, what I'm talking about here, this living water, it's a well that comes up out of you. You don't even need to go get water. And she's like, wait, what? So Jesus has got something, like her whole mindset here is being changed. Jesus is blowing this girl's mind. And because she's like, you got to give me this water because I don't want to have to come back to this well. Now, if you're going to do your chores, let's say it's summer and you have a lot of outside chores. I'm going to say this. And you have your choice to do it. during different parts of the day. Are you going to choose early in the morning while it's still cool, or the middle of the afternoon whenever it's 117,000 degrees here in Texas? We're going to do it early in the morning while it's still cool. Back when I had a real job and I did real work instead of making fun of teenagers. Back when I worked at a plant and I was a maintenance worker there, and I had a list of chores, so to speak, that I had to complete before my shift was over. Now, when I was on day shift, which wasn't very often, when I was on day shift, as soon as I came in that morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, I went through, we had our staff meeting in first in the morning, sat through with my boss and talked about, what we got going on, the different projects. And then the first thing I did was go get all that done before it got hot outside, because I worked outside. That was the first thing I did while it was still cool. I wasn't about to be out there welding on stuff if I didn't have to in the heat of the day. Like, that's just dumb. And it was the flip on, at night. Or like when it would get cold and I was working nights and it would get down to like 30 degrees, and I thought that was the coldest thing in the world, having to work outside in 30-degree weather. I would do it earlier while it was still warm so that I could feel my fingers while I was working. And so there's a reason this woman didn't go to the well during the cool of the day, because that's where the other women were. Because any sensible person would go at that time, right? It doesn't matter. You can turn them on. So the rest of the village went to get water early in the morning while it was still cool. But here's this woman in the middle of the day. And the thing is, she was ashamed to reveal herself to her people. But Jesus saw through all of that. Jesus saw through the front. She couldn't hide from Jesus, and neither can we. He sees through all our bullcrap. He doesn't care. He sees us as we are. Any mask we can put up, he doesn't care. He can see right through it. Because here's the deal: when Jesus is like, I can give you a well springing up within sight, so you don't have to come get water here every day. And here's the thing: this girl was thirsty, and I mean that in the modern sense. Like, she was thirsty. Okay, she was thirsty. What? Yeah. Let's see this, because Jesus is like, she's like, well, you got to give me this, and just like, well, go fetch your husband. I'll talk to you about it. And she's like, well, I ain't got a husband. And she's like, that's right, you don't have no husband. The guy you're living with now ain't your husband. You had 5 husbands before him. Mm-hmm. She thirsty, right? She thirsty. But here's the thing, aren't we all? I mean, maybe not in that sense. Maybe not in that sense we're not thirsty, but I mean, we've got these wells that we keep coming back to that just won't satisfy us. They feel good in the moment, but man, if it doesn't last very long. We've got, different relationships, or, for me, I'm going to be honest, guys, one of my things that I go back to is food. Like, and I don't mean like wholesome meals. I mean candy and Snickers and M&Ms. Leanne gets mad because she'll get a big bag of M&Ms, and before she gets a chance to eat them, they're like gone. But we've got all, and that can manifest itself in relationships or in sex, like for this woman, or drugs or porn or pride. It looks different for everybody, but we're all a little bit thirsty if you really think about it. And so we don't like talking about that, so we'll change the subject, and that's exactly what this woman does. She's like, well, you tell me my sin, and I didn't even say nothing. So you must be smart, right? So if you're so smart, tell me, how are we supposed to do church? She changed the subject. Where's that coming from? No, there's nothing reading over there. Anyway, so she's like, you're so smart. Tell me, how are we supposed to do church? And because she had this small concept religion. Like I said, during Nehemiah's time, or just before that, they had built a temple in Samaria to worship God, because the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. So it's like, well, we'll just build one here. And so the Jews made it a big deal that, no, we worship in Jerusalem on on the Temple Mount, and that's where God told us to worship. And it's true. That's where God had told them to worship. And she's like, well, y'all say that, and we worship over here at this church, and who's right? And Jesus is like, oh, you have such a small concept. And Jesus, let me look at this. Verse 21, it says, believe me, woman. I always love like the way they put that, because it's like he's just referring to her. But in my mind, when I read it, like, you believe me, woman. An hour is coming when you will worship our Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. And then he says in verse 24, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. You see, she had a small concept of religion. She had a small concept of God. And like we talked about a few weeks ago, we all have our God box, and it's up to us to allow God to expand it and understand more about him as we walk. But Jesus says it doesn't matter where you worship. And she and just kind of as an illustration of how small she thought, she said, her answer to this, well, I know Jesus is coming. She didn't know it was Jesus yet, but she said, the Messiah is coming. Yeah, I know that. And I think we have the same concept here in the evangelical church in our time as, when I die, I'll go to heaven. The same concept that Martha had about Lazarus. We'll in the day of resurrection, we'll all see each other again. I'll get to see Jesus when I go to heaven, and I'm happy with that. And this woman had the same idea. Messiah's coming, and it'll be all right. He'll take away all our sin. And Jesus is like, I'm sure he wants to shout at her like, it's me. That person is me. I am the Messiah, and he's shouting at you. There's no heaven after. I'm not saying there isn't, but it's not about having heaven after you die. It's about having heaven here now. Jesus says, it's me. I am heaven. I am all. Jesus he was all of God come down into earth for us, on our behalf. So guys, here's the main takeaway. There's no challenge this week, okay? This is the last one. This is the last Domino series. There's no challenge this week because life is challenging enough. We're all thirsty for something, and we keep coming back to that well. All I ask is that you learn to find your fulfillment in Christ and to hunger and thirst after righteousness, because it's better for you. It is. And that's just all I want for you. Because we can, this woman, it says she had 5 husbands, and the guy she was living with now wasn't a husband. And just like all our different vices, just like everything we come to, it falls flat every time. It doesn't last very long. The high just goes away. It goes away, whether it's porn or drugs or food or relationships. It all falls flat. And I think sometimes we start chasing things, and in that, we find Jesus. Just like week 1. We find Jesus, he changes our course, and we follow him. So while the rest of anything we chase after falls flat, when we encounter Jesus, it'll last us the rest of our life. There's no waiting for heaven for when we die. Heaven is available to you now through Jesus. And so I've titled this Dead Ends, because there's so many dead ends in our life, and I'm not talking about the ones in my hair. There are dead ends in our life, and as we chase them, all we're going to find is emptiness. But when we hunger and thirst after righteousness, we'll be fulfilled. Because have you ever been hungry and grabbed the chips? This will be my last illustration and we'll be done. Have you ever grabbed a bag of chips and you ate some chips and you were still hungry, like you were empty, but you were still hungry and you kept eating and you kept eating. And that's kind of one of those things why people gain weight, is because they eat things that aren't good for them. It doesn't actually fill them or nourish them, right? We've all had that feeling. We understand that. But let me ask you this. Have you ever chased after something, attained it, and felt good about it? So for an example, for me, lifting weights, when I reach a goal, whether it's slimming down or bulking up or reaching a weight on the bench or whatever that looks like, whenever I reach that, I want more. Now that's much different than the chips. The chips is I want more because I feel empty. In the weight room, whenever I reach that goal and I get to the end, I want more because it makes me better. And I want to build on top of that. See, that's what Jesus is like. all these other dead ends, all the husbands and the guy and the porn and the sex and the drugs and the pride and the selfishness, it's the bag of chips. It leaves us empty. Even as much as we eat it, we're still going to feel empty. But when we chase after Jesus, when we hunger and thirst for righteousness, we get there and we want more, not because we're empty, but because we feel how good it is to be full. And we want more, and we want more. And as we seek after Jesus, he's not going to hold himself back from us. He will give us heaven here now. Let's pray.